breaking down the biggest moments of the Vanderpump Rules reunion. Hey guys, welcome back to another shared news. We are going to get into this crazy Vanderpump Rules reunion. As always, I'm your host, Morgan Wright, and I am joined today by Zachary Reality. We will get into it all, but first, if you're new here, make sure you subscribe to our channel and ring the bell so you don't miss out on any reality TV updates. Zachary, have you recovered from the reunion yet?
Yes, I have. I watched part 2 last night, part 1 the night before. Morgan, we kinda talked about this last week, like, the reunion delivered. There was so much more, going on with the cast from when they stopped filming, and it just really picked up, and they ended up closing out the season on a really good note, and, I mean, we don't know if they're coming back for next season, but this reunion definitely gave us a lot of context and, storylines that we're invested in.
We waste no time getting into what everyone already knows to kick off the reunion, and that is that James and Raquel have ended their engagement. There were a lot of shocking revelations to come out of this moment for them. They don't think of each other as their soulmates. They also made the shocking confession that they haven't been having sex consistently for 2 years. Zach, what do you think was the most shocking revelation about their relationship?
Probably the whole sex thing, and you saw when Raquel brought it up, James was like, like, "We don't say that, don't mention it." He did not want to bring it up, but, Raquel mentioned that they haven't been having consistent sex in 2 years since he sent those rage texts, and that kinda led me to believe that they have been growing apart for a really long time, and I don't know if they felt pressured to stay together because they're on this show and because they have all the same friends, but it was very clear to me during, the time when they were talking about the breakup that they're both so checked out of the relationship and that they're leaving on amicable, good terms and that it's the right decision and that they've come to this agreement.
Yeah, and I do think it's important to highlight the fact because I have seen this headline everywhere. James and Raquel haven't had sex in 2 years. That's not what they said. They said that they would have it on special occasions, but just in the regular mundane day to day, they weren't really connecting. So, still just not the best, especially when you are getting ready to get married. Of course, we did see her give the ring back on camera. Were
Right.
we expecting her to do this here at the reunion?
No, and definitely not, but I feel like I understand why she did because she's moving out tomorrow. Like as they mentioned, like she was moving out of their apartment the next day. They're not going to see each other probably for a little bit. Like this is the chance to give it back. So I understand why she decided to give it back. I think that she really wanted to get all of the closure that she needed and same with James at this reunion because this is like the sit down. You have Andy and the rest of the cast asking you the hard questions. You're talking about your relationship for how many hours. So I understand why she gave it back to kind of just like release and get the rid of the closure. And we also know that Raquel was the one who initiated the breakup. So I mean, if James dumped her, it would have been different, but because she initiated it, I think it's only right that she gives it back.
And of course, we do have this moment where James gets up and walks off, and we'll get to that in a second. But were you surprised with how James handled himself in the first, I don't know, 10 minutes? He was very emotional. He was I don't want to say calmer because he does have moments where he starts to get like flustered. But I
Yeah.
will say, in my opinion, he did seem calmer. I mean, what did you take away from how James reacted to talking about it at the reunion?
Yeah, I mean, and that was the thing is that Raquel was so worried about breaking up with him because of his reactions, because he's so reactionary. But he handled himself really well at the reunion and he was really mature and, eloquent in how he was speaking about the breakup. The one time he left the stage, Morgan, was because Brock was pushing his buttons. And I know we're going to
Yeah.
get into it, but I feel like Brock was the one that was like triggering those reactions. But in regards to his, relationship with Raquel and them talking about it, like, the only time he got mad is when she brought up the sex stuff.
Well, let's get into Brock because that is when James has his little walk-off moment where it feels like in every Bravo reunion now we have to have at least one walk-off moment. And this time around it was James. But it wasn't really until Brock started getting into an argument with James about his temper. Do we think that Brock maybe needs to stay in his lane a little bit? Or do you think what he was saying to James was warranted in the moment?
I think Brock kinda came for James and kinda came for the jugular. I mean, they've been feuding all season. They clearly do not like each other. They know how to push each other's buttons. I think James has been frustrated with Brock throughout the season, especially because of the whole fight that happened, on the finale with with them trying to like sneak away to get married during their engagement weekend. But I think Brock just like crossed the line when he was like, "This is why your partner doesn't even want to be with you." And it was just like, Brock, you can't call the kettle black. You do not have the best pass. You just got onto the show. I felt like he could have been a little bit more gracious towards James, but I kind of feel like he wants to have Sheena's back, and Sheena's like best friends with Raquel. So I feel like there was just no loyalty between Brock and James.
Okay, well, speaking of Sheena, let's move on to her because she was in the middle of yet another feud, Charlie versus Sheena. So the situation with Brock's friend, the Danica situation, the TV on the wall situation. I mean, Charlie says that Sheena is always making excuses, that Sheena is always the victim. Everything is always everybody else's fault. I feel like I know the answer to this question, but are you team Charlie or are you team Sheena?
I'm definitely team Charlie. And I honestly I like Charlie, but I don't think that she had to be there, especially during part 2. I don't think she said one word the entire reunion for part 2. The first part she was only involved because of Sheena. I mean, it was probably hard for her to like get in this cast, so she's just trying to kind of make waves as much as she can because, she's on the show, so she has to do something. But I feel like Sheena also did do a good job of like, yes, she made a lot of excuses, but I feel like Sheena was just like, "It's never gonna happen again. I'm sorry. Like, let's drop it." And I think that was just something Charlie was waiting for a while, and she finally got it. And I guess that's what reunions are for.
Yeah, and Sheena did have a really vulnerable moment when she opened up about having preeclampsia, which led to some other health issues when it comes to giving birth. So we are sending love to Sheena on that front. I really appreciated her being really vulnerable, open, and honest. And I saw, on Instagram, a lot of mothers related to that as well. So that was a moment that I like to see from Sheena. I want to move on to one of my favorite parts, and that is when Andy asked Sandoval about his relationship with Jax Taylor. Tom was kind of avoiding the question, and then Ariana kind of just let it all out there, like, yes, they hate each other. Are we surprised that this relationship is done? What was your take on this?
Well, yeah, I'm not surprised the relationship is done. See, I don't think they hate each other. I think Jax hates Tom. I feel like Tom was able to be like, "Yeah, I'm down to say hi. We could be cordial." But Jax is the one that like really hates Tom. And I feel like we only hate people that we once loved. Like you can't hate someone that you never cared about. So I think Jax might be a little envious that Tom became the number one guy in the group.
Yep,
And I
yep.
wish that Jax would just show some maturity and just be like, let bygones be bygones, because Tom is more than capable of being cordial.
Yeah, I agree. It's 100% rooted in jealousy. I think it all started when Lisa, created the Tom Tom brand and Jax was not included at all. I think that was really a big hit to his ego. And then to be let go from the show, while the Toms, are going up and up and up and up, I think that he just could
Mhm.
not handle that. And that's ultimately what led to the demise of his relationship with Sandoval. But speaking of the Toms, let's switch gears to Tom, and their new business venture, Schwartz and Sandy's. We did get a little tour of the new place, and then we get into the Katie of it all. So, do you think that Katie should have been included in this new business? It was a huge storyline this season.
Not really, because I feel like Katie and Sandoval just can't seem to get along. So it's just like if Katie's putting her nose in the business, it's just gonna make everyone else more stressful, especially because this is so stressful as Tom Sandoval is literally pulling his weight for Tom Schwartz. I feel like Sandoval is getting this up and running. So it's just like he already has to deal with the baggage of his partner not doing as much work as he's doing. The last thing he needs is like his partner's wife adding more baggage. I understand that Katie wanted to be involved, but I feel like she should have just like kept her nose out of it for a little bit and then maybe, became more involved once the restaurant was closer to opening. In the beginning stages, it's so stressful and I just feel like Katie wasn't adding much value. I think she was adding more frustration for everybody involved. And I like Katie. I just think that she could have just like let them do it because it is their thing. So that's kind of where I stand on it. I'm team Sandoval.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. The reunion is the first time we hear of this agreement that they had. Like we agreed that we weren't going to have anybody else except for the two Toms involved in this. And then, Tom Schwartz is like, well, things are subject to change. I feel like that was a very important piece of the puzzle that we didn't really hear anything about in the season. And maybe they did that on purpose to make it a bit more dramatic. Obviously, we know that Ariana and Katie are kind of working on their own thing. I think that will be better suited for them in the long run. Speaking of, Katie and Ariana, we did get into this fight to wrap up part one of the Vanderpump Rules reunion, and it was all about Sandoval's claim that he was bringing money into the Schwartz household. I thought it was very interesting that the two couples had completely different takes and outlooks on what happened. So, are you more team Tom and Ariana, or are you more team Tom and Katie when it comes to that comment in particular?
I'm definitely team Sandoval and Ariana. I really feel like Sandoval pulls the weight for Tom Tom. And yes, there is no Tom without Tom, but I do feel like there is a lot of gigs and appearances in the restaurant where Sandoval is pulling 75% of the weight, and he's doing it because, these opportunities want Tom and Tom, but Sandoval is the one putting the effort, setting everything up, making everything so easy so Tom Schwartz can just kind of show up, and that's kind of how it looks from the outside looking in, and I just feel like Sandoval just wants to be appreciated, and it just feels like Katie and Schwartz just don't want, especially Katie, just don't want to at least acknowledge how much effort Tom Sandoval is doing for the brand of Tom and Tom. Not even just the restaurant, but just their brand as a whole. So Team Sandoval.
So that's where we end part one. And I unfortunately have not had the opportunity to watch part two yet, but I know that you have. Does that
Yeah.
argument get resolved? Because, that it ends with Katie saying, Tom's at band practice and Tom's doing this. And really, she's saying the opposite of what you are saying, that it's Schwartz that's pulling 75% of what's going on in their new business. So, how does that shake out in the end?
Honestly, I feel like they kind of came to a good terms, but it kind of also seemed like it was up in the air. So I really don't think that there was much resolution, to be completely honest. But an update I do have for you is that Ariana and Katie are still planning on doing their sandwich shop, but they just haven't, like, they're just getting their investors and they're still getting the ground running. So there isn't much like progress with that, but there is like a few updates that they're still planning on doing it.
And obviously, the big storyline coming into part two is Lala's split with Randall. What were your biggest takeaways from that? Because we saw none of that in part one. Obviously, Lala was not there. She had to come in via Zoom, and they saved this for last. So, what were your biggest takeaways on that?
Yeah, it seems like Lala was extremely upset at the reunion talking about Randall. A lot of the cast was blindsided. They thought Randall was a stand up man. And there was a few people on the cast who did hear rumors that Randall was cheating. But because Lala, has always been so private in her relationship and guarded and confrontational and aggressive, a lot of people just didn't want to get involved in Lala and Randall. So they kind of, put their nose out of it. So James and Sandoval did hear rumors about Randall cheating, and they just didn't want to tell Lala because of Lala's, kind of shield over her, which I guess is to protect her. But Lala seemed extremely devastated, distraught. She kind of got into it with Scheana a little bit because, Lala, I guess, was jealous that Scheana had a partner like Brock who was, fully invested in parenting. And, Lala was doing a lot of things by her own. It was really hard for her as she just gave birth to have to work with the nurses and the nannies, and she didn't have Randall by her side. So, Lala has just been very vulnerable going through a lot. And the craziest thing, Morgan, is that Raquel actually said that she always knew Lala as a mistress. And then Lisa Vanderpump said, you get them how you lose them. So people have sympathy for Lala, but I also think people feel like she got what was coming to her because they never believed that she loved Randall to begin with. Brock even made a comment, referring to Lala, "Oh, it's your sugar daddy, blah blah blah." So, not everyone is fully supportive of her.
I mean, a lot of us thought that, right? I mean, like,
Of
we
course.
all remember, they spent the night together. The next day, she gets the Range Rover. They get in a fight. Oh, but can I still keep the Gucci slides? So it was very odd. And I always just felt like, maybe Lala did grow to love Randall, but she was always like, younger and hotter. And I think she probably thought that she changed him, because he was doing all these things before he got with Lala. So maybe she thought, I don't know, that things were going to be different for her. It is sad. I mean, especially now that she has a daughter, and I do hate that she had to do what she had to do on her own without Randall, but I feel like, everyone kind of saw the warning signs. And you're right. I mean, she's been so private. Nobody was ever allowed to talk about Randall on the show. So why would they do so now, especially with such serious accusations? I feel like she's being a little hypocritical in that moment. If she was saying, "You guys should have told me," and it's like, "Well, really? Do you really think that we
You
should
wouldn't
have
let
told you?"
us.
Because yeah.
She definitely hates Randall right now. Like they don't have communication. They talk through like an app or something and it's only about Ocean. But I feel like eventually over time Lala and Randall will become friendly just because they do have a child together who's a baby. They're going to have to share birthday parties, maybe like, is there are they going to church? Like there's going to have to be like, graduations. So I feel like Lala and Randall will eventually come to a better place and be able to be amicable, but maybe not for a couple of years.
Yeah, well, I mean, if one thing is for sure, if it does get picked up, we are in for a wild season 10. And I feel like the reunion might have helped save Vanderpump Rules because we did not have a great season. We didn't have a great season last time around. And, we went 2 years without there even being Vanderpump Rules during the pandemic. So, fingers crossed that we see some of these storylines play out over season 10, that they get picked again. Because I don't know about you, Zach, but Vanderpump Rules really is my first reality TV love. I just can't turn
Oh,
my
I
back on it
love
for
it
whatever
too.
reason.
I really have always loved the show, and I mean, I hope that they keep, going with new seasons, but I feel like I don't know, sometimes all things come to an end, and I don't think it's a show that's meant to last forever.
Well, you guys, let us know what you think in the comments. Do you think they will be picked up for another season, or is it time to close that chapter? I mean, there are so many things that you could leave opinions on in the comments, whether it's James and
Yeah.
Raquel, whether it's Lala and Randall, whether it's Scheana V Charli, whatever you want. We love to hear from you. Make sure you ring the bell, subscribe to our channel before you leave so you don't miss out on any pop culture updates. Of course, as always, I'm your host, Morgan Wright, joined by my reality TV loving bestie, Zachary Reality. We talk about reality TV and pop culture all day long on our social media channels, so make sure you come say hi to us. Our usernames are on the screen right now. Thank you guys again for watching, and we'll see you back here next time. Bye.
See ya.